when you hire people who are like yourself and you don't know yourself really well, that does not end well. Because the moment they do something that you don't like about yourself, you start to project that into them.
That's crazy. What? Unconventional wisdom? Oh, yeah.
I like that.
Hello, welcome to Bad Advice, where we give unconventional wisdom to startup founders. Things that you may never heard before, but maybe you should consider. Today, I have my good friend Idris with me. He's a technology leader and a startup founder. I won't spoil it too much. I'll let him explain his background and his bad advice that he has for us. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about your background, your story? How did you get into tech?
Let's go back to 1994.
Way long ago. Okay. After World War II. How old were you back then?
I was 10 years old.
Okay.
And I was invited to my, aunt's house. I was with my cousins. And then I come across this box. There's a monitor in there. There's a keyboard and there's this wiggly thing. It's a mouse. And people playing chess on that. And I was a big chess player at the time. So it was my turn to play the chess. I don't know if you've ever played battle chess. It's when the characters came to life.
I know. I think I did. Was that from like MS-DOS? Like back in Windows 3.1?
This is before Windows 95.
Yeah. Okay. And it was like the rook would turn into a big soldier and like would step on the other soldier.
That's right.
Oh my God. Yeah, I remember that.
Yes.
It was a little horrifying for me. I was too small.
I had this Jumanji moment where I felt I was transported into this game. And that's when I fell in love with the computer.
Nice.
So by age of 11, I had the computer. It was my sister's computer, of course, at the time. And I just stopped hanging around with 11-year-olds.
Started coding.
It was my life, day and night. I did everything from installing the hard drive, changing the RAM, from hardware to software. Don't ask me how many times I reinstalled Windows 95.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's a very similar story for people around our age. Like they saw Windows 95 and it was like life-changing.
Yeah.
So how did that lead to you entering tech?
I think I was around 15, 16. I immigrated to New Zealand. And I went there for university as well. I did my bachelor's in computer science. I had a bit of a head start compared to the rest of the group because I already done a lot of coding, website building, hardware. So I had a really good time at university.
Nice. And you also, I remember you mentioned you did a psychology degree, or you started the psychology degree.
Yes, I think when I was maybe 19, 20, I had this moment of realization. I found myself very deeply inside the machine. And I took a moment and I thought to myself, where is the human side of this? So that day I made a decision, I'm going to do a double degree.
Oh, interesting.
So I picked up some psychology courses and I did computer science and psychology just to make sure I get a bit of human and also the machine. And I think this is where my interest in culture came to be, because there was this course in psychology. It was about developmental psychology and talked about rituals and routines and the concept of the dinner table, where families come together and they have shared memories. And it doesn't matter what happens, the next day, they always come to that table and they feel safe and they can exchange stories and tell each other about how their day was it, and if there were any issues during the day, or they had happy moments or sad moments, it could be shared with the family.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is that like tech stand-ups or something? Almost always like every morning, you do a tech stand. Pretty cool. Awesome. And what happened after that degree?
So I did a few jobs in software engineering. I really enjoyed it. Did a lot of client-facing work, a lot of professional services, a lot of product work. And in about 2013, I decided it was time for me to build my own startup. So I co-founded a company called Bloomista with my wife. And we were the first to market to have an iPhone app that would allow you to order flowers.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And this was it was a very exciting moment, because I loved flowers. I love anything that's beautiful, aesthetically beautiful. And I was able to work with the best photographer in New Zealand at the time. So she did our shots for us. So it was a beautiful launch. A lot of friends and family gathered, and we launched the startup. And then this is where some bad advice came, where the marketing company we were talking to advised us to put $5 worth of Facebook ads. What we should have done is put $500 worth of
$5 is like not gonna.
It's obviously there wasn't much traction, and it went on for a couple of years before we shut it down. But
Okay.
I had a beautiful team. I had a team of 5. We bootstrapped it. Had a few developers and a designer. I still remember the moment where we had our first user test. That happened with one of my artist friends. I have a lot of friends who are artists. So he was looking at the app, the MVP of the app, taking a look and said, "I can't use this." I remember I was sitting on the bus next to him, and he was giving me feedback. I was just stunned, So I go home, and we have our virtual meeting with my team, and I tell the team what it is, what the feedback is. And they all looked really scared. And they had this moment of, I'm just going to tell them off.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I just said, this is a learning opportunity. It's time to pivot. Let's get some new designs and new specs in place and talk more to users so we can improve the user interface. And I still am really good friends with two of the employees I had back in 2013 because of this incident. They still come to me for advice and for mentorship. And I love them. They love me. It's been a lifetime friendship with them.
Yeah. So was it that maybe they, because of their previous jobs or their own background before, they didn't feel like safety there? Like maybe they were like, oh, are we getting fired or something?
Yeah, I think there is a big, let's say, percentage of teams. I don't want to say companies, because I think within every company there are little groups that have a better culture than other departments.
Yeah.
I think this whole psychological safety is a big thing. Usually when something happens, let's say there's a big production problem, everybody panics and they start finger pointing. How did this happen? Why did you do this? Why didn't you test this? Because of that, people are used to feeling blamed.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it turns these learning opportunities into moments of punishment. And when that happens, that erodes trust, and it creates fear, and people stop trying because they're trying to hide things. And the better way to deal with it is to take every failure as an opportunity to learn. If people feel safe, feel psychologically safe at their jobs, in my experience, innovation and team performance just goes through the roof. I've seen that firsthand in many places.
Got it. That's really cool. That reminded me of like, I don't know where I read this or who said this, which was, like good organizations is where bad news travels fast. Have you heard that?
Yes.
When
Yes.
there's something wrong, the communication is so strong. Everybody communicates it very quickly instead of like hiding it. And,
That's right.
That's what it reminded me of. So I think anybody, by the way, talking to you, anybody would sort of see the passion you have for culture, whether they know you've did a psychology degree or not. I think it's just, I remember we met at a networking event, and
Yes.
I think that was one of your questions, or we were chatting about company culture and engineering culture. So how do you create that psychologically safe environment for engineers?
I think psychological safety is an element within a good culture.
All right.
I think it's time for startups and large organizations to maybe move away from the concepts of culture fit, culture add.
All right.
I think it's more important to focus on value fit. Do they fit within the values of this team, this department, or this company? Which also means there would be a good culture fit and a good culture add. Because when you start looking at culture from going back to my developmental studies about safety at the dinner table, there are many different ways of defining a good culture at companies. However, the one I like, and I think is more rooted in science, specifically science that comes from empirical studies within psychology, the big example is the dinner table, is rituals and routines. Wherever there is a predictable set of rituals and routines, together with the value of the department or the company, then that is the ingredients for building a very strong culture. So what we are doing here is, when we talk about rituals, so rituals are something that you occasionally do, but you must do it every time. So for example, you do a release on the weekend. Mm-hmm. You must order pizza because we're doing a release after hours, Or team building exercises, you do them occasionally, they're not predictable. Or you have a company picnic or a department lunch, or you have an overnight stay somewhere. These are your rituals. Mm-hmm. These are things that create memories. Memories are what brings people together, good memories. Because at the end of the day, it is emotions that people remember, it's not the logic. And then moving to routines.
Sorry about that. Like, there's this quote: "People remember how you made them feel, not what you said," or something like that. It's like people remember the feelings they had when they were around
remember
you.
the feelings, the emotions,
Yeah.
not the logic behind those conversations.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Which is quite fascinating, actually, because you think you should have a very logical approach to this conversation, but it's not the logic that people remember at the end of the day. It's how it makes them feel.
Yeah.
So that's what you want to replicate in a company culture. You want to be on the good side of people's feelings. And that psychological safety is one of those. And empathy is another big thing there, which we can maybe discuss a bit later. Then you have routines. Routines are very much aligned. This is one of the reasons I really love the Agile Scrum methodologies, because it's full of routines.
Yeah.
If they had no value at all, these ceremonies, a lot of people say they're a waste of time. Yes, I agree. If they don't do anything at all, they build culture. And that's why the core values of Scrum are, the
Human over something like that. Human over process, I think, is one of them, or
Exactly.
people over process. That's what it
It
says.
is.
Yeah.
It's like trust, openness, all of those good things that you see. So now with your routines, it's your team meetings, it's Scrum ceremonies, all of those come together to build your routines. It could be your weekly department meeting or monthly department meeting, or your one-on-ones every week you have with your employees. And then you want to define your values. Why are we here? Goal setting is great. Goal setting is really important for performance reviews, keeping people in check, motivating them. But the goals need to translate into your core values. They need to have a purpose. They need to have some impact that goes back to people's feelings. So the biggest companies are the ones who can articulate their vision in such a way that people feel that sense of belonging. Now, we don't want to go to the family culture.
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem.
Yeah.
But you want to go to the friendship culture. That you are really good friends. Like, I'm still very good friends with the 2 employees we had.
Yeah.
Even though when I dissolved the company, obviously we had to give them a package. But there were no hard feelings at the end because it was well communicated and everything was discussed.
Got it. That's really cool.
What you want to do when you're building a culture is obviously everyone has to collaborate, has to be like a sports team, have each other's back. Then you get into this situation where you're not empowering people enough. By the way, I really dislike the word empowerment, but I have to use it. Empowerment, to me, it means you took the power away from individual in the first place.
Now you got
And now you have to give it back. So really best cultures are, don't take the power away in the first place, so you have to give it back. But the word empowerment obviously does not indicate that. So there's a little bit of room for misunderstanding here. So you want to also empower people in that kind of team, and leader as coach is what you need to build a really good culture. So going back to your sports team analogy, so you have to be the leader as coach for the team, but it's not all having fun and growing. It's also about making sure when something happens, you address it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to tolerate things that are detrimental to your team or specifically other people's feelings.
Yeah.
When there's arguments or misunderstandings, or somebody misbehaves, or maybe they're not delivering well, you want to have those conversations really quickly to build a good culture, because learning is a significant aspect of culture. And learning is always should always be one of the core values that you're building in the team.
I think any startup you look at, like you go to their about page, like one of the core values, like either improvement or learning, lifetime learners, like
innovation. Yes, yes,
so
that's right. Yeah,
I totally agree. And if you're not giving that feedback immediately, although it's very hard, like that's probably one of my own, things I should work on. If you're not giving people feedback immediately, you're robbing them of the opportunity for them to grow, right? And if you're giving that feedback a month later, it's like, I was just underperforming, for a month. And there's also, I was listening to this podcast actually today where that person works in tech. Their biggest regret was being passive aggressive because they were not communicating what they need from people. So even though if you don't want to hurt the other person's feeling, you're kind of maybe hurting yourself by bottling it up and then being passive aggressive to them unintentionally. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
So after Bloomista, great name by the way, like it now makes so much sense. What did you end up doing? I noticed you worked at a few big corporations with thousands of employees as a director, senior director, in leadership positions. Can you tell me a little about that and how does that contrast with like startup. Like I think it's a very big gap going. Usually people go from founding startups to like, okay, small company, co-founder but yeah.
It's the startup experience and managing that small team, I think, positioned me really well to move into management and architecture, because I already had a couple of years of management and, architecture experience coming out of that. So I went from software developer into leadership, and then I was able to apply those skills in other corporations. So most people have to wait for that promotion, but for me, I was thrown deep into, okay, now how do I manage a team? All I had my managers manage the teams. What had I learned from other people? And then I was able to apply that in my startup. And then I took that experience and I worked at bigger corporations in leadership roles. And I had really great experience. I think one of them is CoreLogic Intersect that I worked with. And I had a very small team there, maybe 6 or 7 people. And again, we had great culture, but the company itself had a really good culture. So I was able to operate within a really good culture of that company. It was already agile, and there was a lot of psychological safety. There was mentoring available. So I learned a lot about how bigger corporations do culture.
In a big corporation, I would say it's maybe harder even because, so like you don't have control and connection with every single person, right?
It is. Yeah. And then that prepared me for my next role, which I think I walk into this job. By the way, the company has really good culture. It was just this particular department. I get this job to run this department, and I walk in. Second day, 7 p.m., they call me into a meeting. And there are 30 people on this call.
That doesn't sound good yet. Sounds like an ass layoff.
So it is. It's 30 people on this call. And the only way this happens is if people are scared, they will be blamed. So they call everyone in the meeting. So finally somebody can figure out what the problem is. Mm-hmm. Now, I came from a company willingly that had a really good culture into this other company, really good culture, except for, what I had to do. So I walked into this really low trust environment.
So, sorry, the 30 people are on the call is sort of like a management, making sure everybody's like paying attention to this problem that needs to be solved right now. Like
this is a production issue. These are our professionals.
So like, let's get everybody on the call. Okay. It feels like sort of a little intimidation, not intimidation, but it's like they want to have a tighter leash sort of on what's going on. Right?
Yes.
You don't need 30 people on a call.
You don't need 30
you need
people.
2 maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's okay, something needs to change. I mean, I can either walk back to get my old job or, work on this. It was a good challenge. So I picked the challenge and I was able to really turn things around and introduced a very good culture into the department. And at the beginning, it was all about psychological safety. Because a low trust environment, history of a lot of production bugs, and the business rightfully was really worried because there were a lot of issues.
Yeah.
We had to care about the business. We had to care about the revenue, the customers. But the team was very scared. So this is where I think you have to come in as a leader and help people to not just be reactive, but be proactive. And when you move from a culture of being reactive to a culture of being proactive, that creates psychological safety and trust in a sense that people actually don't have to worry about the next production issue because we already anticipated it and we fixed it, right? Then, this team grew. It was about 3 people. at the beginning. We grew the team to about 25, 30 people. And we had great time. We started going out to the Blue Mountains for overnights. We went for company retreats, and we had regularly went out for lunch and did team building exercises and invited the families. We had the family picnics. So it started to embed the Scrum values into the team from learning, trust, innovation, all the way to appealing to people's personal lives and feelings. And I think one of the most important things in building a culture is the one-on-one meetings. You must have one-on-one meetings with everyone, because you can't personally care about people if you don't know who they are. You need to know if they're expecting a child, or you need to know if they're buying a house, because knowing all of these then makes sense why people behave in certain ways at work. Because people's personal lives always somehow affects their work. So the more information you have, then the less judgment, the less you judge them. It's okay, what is he like today? Oh, they must have gone for an X-ray. Or, you immediately know. You don't need to ask the question why all the time. You already know why.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps a lot.
That's so cool. I never thought about it that way. I have so many questions. Let's start with, you said something that was super interesting. You mentioned rituals and Scrum, Agile Scrum. And you said if there is no technical value in that, there is at least value in the ritual. So you believe that if there is a thing that the team does regularly on a sort of a schedule, let's say a meeting at 2 p.m. on Mondays, that they talk about something. So that builds essentially over time, that builds some trust, right?
It does, yeah.
That's pretty cool. I just remembered, we have this meeting in our company where we watch user recordings, so what they do in the app. And sometimes it's fun, it's like they can't figure it out and we're watching them trying to figure it out. Sometimes it goes great and we get very cheerful that they figured it out how to use the app, right? So yeah, I feel like that's one of the highlights of my week, when we're watching, it's like we're watching a movie together. What the movie is our users interacting with our application.
Could you tell me more about Notification API?
Yeah. About what aspect?
Tell me about the company, tell me about the culture. I already know what it does. I don't think we ever discussed exactly in detail.
I've been running it for years and I still don't have a pitch. It's a very easy way to do notifications in any software. So that could be like transactional email notifications, in-app, SMS. You can already do that with a lot of other tools. It's just that with us, it's extremely easy. It's 10x better for your developer and the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. It's bootstrapped. That's one of the big differentiation, internally and externally, because that leads to certain things we can do that our competitors cannot do, like have extremely low prices, or take the company in directions that investors wouldn't necessarily be happy to take it.
Right.
So we have some strengths by being bootstrapped, which is very interesting. I never thought about it. But being bootstrapped also means we have a very, very small team. We're 4 people right now, 2 founders, 2 full-time engineers. And so everybody does everything. And it's sort of like, you mentioned not family, but it's definitely not like a family, but it's more like, it's like we're in a group project together. We know what everybody's kind of doing that day, or if they need help, because if one piece is not working out of 4, that's a big piece. You notice, if somebody's having trouble, you notice that immediately. So it feels great. I love working with the team, but that's my perspective. I'm not sure. I should ask them maybe how they feel, because I have a very opinionated way of running the company, and it's sort of, you either fit with that or you don't. I wouldn't say it's culture fit. I think we're pretty different people, but definitely the things you mentioned, being high in learning, high in openness, being open to working really hard because we're just 4 people. Everybody has to wear a lot of hats. The vision, as you were talking about, like you should have a vision where everybody understands, the role within that vision. I was thinking like, do we have that? I don't think we have that, for example. So that's something I'm going to implement next Monday. No, we have a vision. It's just, I don't think it's shared like that with the team. How would you share that? Can you give me an example of like the vision that people connect with?
So, no, I had my first department outing with, I think the team was maybe around 15, 16 at the time. Before we went to the company offsite, we got together in the boardroom and I got everyone involved. Everyone a little bored. What should be our vision? What should be our vision? How do you like? Obviously, I had prepared some materials for this, but I engaged everyone in defining the vision and the objectives and things they wanted to, essentially, it's a very big Scrum meeting. What works well? What doesn't work well? What should we improve?
But for culture.
But for culture.
Interesting.
So I ran this workshop for half a day, and the workshop was between everyone and having fun. So we got through it really quickly. At the end, we were able to define the vision. And the vision that we defined for the team was, if I remember correctly, turning ideas into value. So the idea is the business or the product managers would give us their ideas, what they want, assuming they've already been validated and there is product market fit. We would turn it into value. So it's not just the software. We were not just an engineering team. It was also bringing value into the company. So again, I think going back to values is key in maintaining a really good culture.
That's really cool. Yeah. No, that's something we did with my co-founder, like day 0, sort of like before we start working together, let's talk about, what's the value? What are we striving for? And that helped a lot. Just making sure we're on the same page. I don't know if that caused us to be on the same page, or we were on the same page and we realized it from the value. You'll never know, I guess. But
right.
I would always do that in any sort of project. Be like, what are we trying to achieve at a very high level? Like in our personal lives, what do you expect out of this? And how do you expect to work together and everything? I found that super useful. I can't imagine like people become co-founders without asking those questions.
Yes, of course.
Which was sort of my first startups, that was like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't generally work out really well. So you have a company culture and a vision that you're striving for. How do you hire for that? Or what do you define as a good hire, in a situation like that?
I think I've maybe hired about 30, maybe 40 people in my lifetime.
Can I ask how many you've fired?
I think 3 or 4.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what's the standard ratio. That checks out. I don't know.
Here you go. It's on the record. 3 or 4 people.
All right.
And I think as you go through the hiring process, like everything else, you gain experience. It gets to a point that within the first 5 minutes if you're going to hire that person.
I feel like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I think especially for founders or people who are trying to build a culture from scratch or improving the culture, you have to make sure you don't hire people that are like yourself. Because what happens is we hire people who are like ourselves, and most people, especially in big corporations, they don't know themselves really well. So what happens is when you hire people who are like yourself and you don't know yourself really well, that does not end well. Because the moment they do something that you don't like about yourself, you start to project that into them.
That's crazy. What? Can you give me an example?
So let's say you are an extrovert who loves playing golf. You hire an extrovert who loves playing golf. And you have a handicap of, I don't know, 75, and he or she has a handicap of 60. And then this person starts talking about playing golf. And then you suddenly realize you're not good at golf as you thought you are. And you start to project that weakness of yours onto the other person. So now, this is an example of not necessarily don't hire people that have the same interests. Mm-hmm. This is not about people of the same interests. By all means, there should be some shared interest between everyone who's being hired. But if you have to hire the right people for the role you're trying to hire for, not just because you like them, not just because you connect with them or there's chemistry or professional chemistry, of course. You have to hire people who are suited for the role. And that is really hard to be objective to do that. And in my belief, the only way you can effectively hire the best people for the job is if you know yourself really well. And a lot of startup founders, from Steve Jobs all the way to Mark Zuckerberg, they talk about self-awareness, about conscious leadership. These are not big buzzwords. These are things that are implemented in very large organizations that have fantastic cultures. Being a conscious leader or having self-awareness. And it's a similar thing with people you're hiring. You have to make sure they have some self-awareness. Obviously, not everyone meditates every day, but people should have at least a little bit of self-awareness about themselves. And the gating question I usually ask in interviews to determine if somebody has self-awareness or not is the cliche question, which I actually learned from my wife, is if you were given a magic wand, what is the one thing you change about yourself?
Yeah.
Now, you can just watch people's reaction. Just watching the initial reaction to tell you everything you need to know. It's really fascinating listening to people. Obviously, the correct way of answering this question is to find a weakness and show it as a strength. So, for example, you would say, I have anxiety speaking in public, but I'm taking Toastmasters, classes or sessions, whatever they call.
Yeah. Very politically correct.
Exactly. Yeah. So these people who do that, you quickly understand they know how to work in a professional environment.
Yeah.
And they're aware that they do have anxiety about public speaking. But people who say there's nothing I need to change about myself, or they immediately talk about their careers, I want to learn, I don't know, AI. Of course, everybody wants to learn AI, but that's not
about you.
Yeah. And even sometimes I press people, so I'm not asking about your career. It's just some people who cannot go deeper than their professional selves. And it's maybe their life stage or they might be suited in a different type of role, mm-hmm. which does not maybe require as much interaction with other people. But if you have an agile Scrum team, you definitely want people who show some degree of self-awareness. And people who show degrees of self-awareness and articulate a weakness into learning, these people are also open to feedback.
Interesting.
And So you end up hiring people who, if something happens, you give them feedback, they're willing to grow. If somebody comes into the job and they don't think there's anything they need to change about themselves, you give them feedback, you can imagine what the outcome would be.
You know, the question they ask, like 3 weaknesses, 3 strengths, like it's always very easy for people to tell their 3 strengths, but it's super hard for them to tell 3 weaknesses.
That's right.
And then people are surprised. Like, so I worked with a lot of students on interview skills and, for them to get hired because of my company, Get Building. I find that a lot of people are surprised because they get rejected for this very sort of like soft questions. It's like, why is not my JavaScript skill so important? Why is answering this question so important in the interview? Mm-hmm. And it's usually, the answer is like, with culture fit interview, it's not about the answer. It's about knowing the answer. Mm. Like the worst answer is not having an answer, which shows that you haven't even thought about what you could be asked. You haven't even thought about who you are, what you want out of this, right? You're just which is fair. They're too laser focused on like getting a job. They forget that, okay, what happens after you have a job, right? Mm-hmm. What are you hoping to do after that? Right. What's your plan in 5 years? Nobody knows, but the fact that you have an answer means that you've at least thought about it, for a minute or two. So I totally agree with that self-awareness. That's a great question, by the way. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about yourself? That's a great question.
Do you want to tell me?
I can tell you, like, I'm not good at networking at all. And usually founders are like sort of required to be like really good at networking, talking to people, sales. I'm horrible at these skills. And I think we met at a networking event. Maybe it's not that bad. I don't know. Maybe it is not that bad. But, that's the result of me going to networking events for years and having like multiple companies. And I'm just scratching the surface on the skills. Right. So if I had to change something, I think it would be my sort of in-person skills. I'm great on Slack. Yeah. And
which reminds me of you, when you're also interviewing, there is the self-awareness, but trustworthiness is also another important thing. Because if you kind of break down what is trust, usually trust is defined as a combination of competence and character. So you're good at your work, and you're also authentic. You have a good character. You can be trusted. But if during the interview, you ask a question, technical or non-technical question you ask, and they make up the answer.
Yeah,
clearly don't know the answer. It puts their competence and character in question.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I never thought about that.
And but you have to be careful. It's not always the case. Some people, they're just shy, but they don't want to look that they don't know the answer. So as a person who is interviewing them, you have to kind of read between the lines of where is the answer coming from.
Yeah.
But if it's coming from a place that they're just intentionally trying to make it up to the best of their ability, not because they think this might be the answer or coming from some other type of insecurity, that's where you have to read in between the lines, and you can very quickly, see whether they would fit within the culture of the trust that you have within the organization.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk about this hypothetical. We have this startup, you come in day one, and the culture is sort of in shambles. Like development, production, everything is late, things keep breaking, and money's running out. The frustrations of a startup are very, I think, generic to all startups. How would you turn that around? Like, what are the first few things you would do? Like 2-3 action items that people can do like right away?
I think it's a really good question. Don't think there is a recipe for how to do it. I think in an environment like that, which feel very similar to large organization I was with, go in 30 people on the call, so everyone's panicking, is you have to shield people from the stress. So we have a saying that says there's nothing worse than useless knowledge. So that includes the time we waste on social media, doom scrolling. It also is true about how much you share with your employees. Now, you don't want to hide the troubles of the company, of course, or your startup or in a big department. You want to be authentic. You want to be trustworthy and you want to be transparent. Most of the time, the stress is based on assumptions and expectations. So as a company founder, you're assuming you won't be able to raise the next round. It is an assumption.
Yeah.
Or you have an expectation that if you do this feature, you're going to raise this round. So you have to understand that within the startup environment or corporate environment, you have to understand what is a fact, what is an assumption, what is an expectation. Only using data and facts is what should be communicated to the employees. Assumptions and expectations are something that people at the top stress about. Employees don't need to stress about assumptions and expectations. So shielding the employees would be the number one thing to do. The second one is, which is related, is psychological safety. So with psychological safety is, you mentioned there are a lot of production problems. Yes, there are a lot of production problems, but let's not punish the employees for those production problems. A little bit of changing the tone of how you do it, and there is a little trick. I actually had a really good LinkedIn post about this, is the word why, W-H-Y. It's a question. If you are in a relationship, if you're at work, with your friends, with your family, if you put yourself in that moment for a second and I tell you, why didn't you call me last night? Or why didn't you test that bug, that this bug was fixed? Or why did this happen? What this does, it immediately puts you in a defensive position. If it's your wife or your partner you're talking to, you say, why didn't you do that? We have this habit of just saying why. Really, the reason we are saying why is to express our frustration. Our frustration is expressed through the question why.
Interesting.
Remove this question from your vocabulary, and I can guarantee all of your relationships in your life will improve by 200%. You have to practice this, because at the beginning it sounds really strange. So you want to replace why with, let's say, tell me more. Or you want to say, what inspired you? Or you want to say, any way else you can express your question that is not expressing your frustration, but is actually trying to understand the root cause of the problem.
The why, because I feel like the answer to the why is like, well, I'm not good enough. Exactly. If I was, well, obviously this wouldn't happen. Or so it's like directly going to the root cause, which is nobody's perfect. The world is not perfect. What can you do about it?
That's
versus
right.
how can we prevent this in the future? Exactly. How can we improve you? Or
exactly.
Interesting.
We still need root cause analysis. The 5 whys method is still valid, as long as you're taking the blame out of it, as long as you're taking you expressing your frustration out of it.
Which is very hard. Like we do the 5 whys or 6, I don't know how many, but we do that and it goes like, okay, why did we have this issue? And at some point it reaches like somebody. It's like, why did this happen? You. And so at some point it reaches that, but you have to be very careful around your tone. Like, were you stressed, or, do we need more training or documentation here? Yeah,
it is.
It's a great point.
And then the third one. So first one is shielding. Second one is psychological safety. The third thing is moving away from a culture of being reactive to proactive.
Can you speak more about that?
So you mentioned there's a lot of bugs. If you actually remove one of your developers for half a day, say just go read through all the logs and all the bugs and find out where exactly these bugs are coming from. I can assure you 99% of the time, 60% of the bugs are coming from one single feature.
It's so funny you mentioned that because we did exactly that. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like the backend. This backend API is like 70% of the bugs are coming.
Exactly. So I remember this job I go in, there were 1,500 incidents a month.
Wow.
So I got a couple of people onto these logs, incidents, bugs. They did a full analysis, created a heat map. So one of my architects, he created the C4 architecture diagram. I don't know if you're familiar, the context,
No.
container, and class. There's one more in the middle. You can look it up. But you kind of have a full picture of the system, and then, we put these red dots, like a heat map, on top of these classes that majority of the bugs were coming from. So then you can filter them by, severity 1, severity 2, severity 3s, and then remove your developers for a day or two or a week or two, whatever it takes to fix that part of that component in your system. And you immediately get a lot of relief, because you're not constantly just fixing little bugs on the surface. You go into the root of the problem, and sometimes it's rewriting the whole component and just engineer it better, or change the database, or introduce an additional database. That doesn't matter what you do. Moving from a culture of being reactive to proactive is absolutely essential.
I could talk about this all day. Like I love this. And I learned so much, by the way. Thank you. And let's talk about sort of what you're up to these days. I know you're starting a startup. Do you want to talk a little about that? What stage you are? What you're thinking about?
I think having been through the startup life and the corporate life, I might answer some questions about culture confidently. At the end of the day, you come to a point and you realize there's still so much more to learn. And I think with what's happened in the world of AI, how it's going to affect people's lives. I think unfortunately at the moment there's a big gold rush to developing AI products that eventually take jobs. I think the best kept secret in the Silicon Valley is that all the VCs are funding AI companies. The best kept secret is they're funding AI companies that take jobs. So now imagine billions of dollars are going into AI companies, startups that can just show better ROI, return on investment, which is obviously people's jobs. I'm interested in the field of how AI can assist or augment people's lives. And in such a way where we bridge traditional work with AI. So I think in March, I'm going to start my founder in residence program with Antler.
Congrats.
Thank you. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. Still a stealth startup. I still need to validate the idea, find product market fit, really understand where it sits. But again, I think going back to my early years, I think machine and humans have to coexist. And if you get too involved in the machine, I think we start to lose our humanity.
Yeah.
I want to be at the intersection of humanity and technology. And I think this is the best time to get into it specifically with the AI-assisted development tools, it's become so much easier to build new products and quickly test them, iterate, find product market fit. And if it's not good, you kill the idea and you go to the next one. We didn't have this luxury before.
Yeah. It would take a year to build like your MVP and...
Exactly. I think last week I built a SaaS product in 3 days. It has registration, a database, an API, a front end and back end. It all took 3 days.
Yeah.
So I think this is the best time to start a startup because you can really find product market fit really rapidly. And I think the chances of success at this moment in time is a lot higher than it was maybe 3 years ago.
I think it's really cool that you're working on something you're so passionate about, like the intersection of technology and sort of the human side of that. I don't know if you saw like that YC pitch that got removed from Twitter.
Tell me.
It was like, it's very interesting. I mean, it's just late stage capitalism that you can expect. It's AI that tracks sort of factory worker and sweatshop workers essentially and tells you that, oh, this person's, efficiency is like 80% instead of 95%.
I did see that.
Yeah, you saw that? I was like, that's kind of sad. I think it's inevitable, but like what you're doing is really cool. Is like, how can we not battle that, but provide a better alternative to only AI, like only technology? Let's augment the both and get better productivity, right? I think that's really cool. So what's your sort of personal reason to go back into a startup? Like, startups are, I think we all agree, it's horrible. It's horrible business.
Ask me next year.
Okay. Do you like to not eat and, I always ask these questions from a founder, like, why do you do this to yourself? And people ask me the same and I'm like, I don't know. It's just...
I think we all go into it assuming, no, it's going to be easy and assuming it's going to be successful. I think like every fairy tale, if you go around the mountain the easy way, you don't get to slay your dragons.
Yeah.
So I think to be successful in anything, you have to slay the dragons and go through the dark forest and really get in touch with that yin and yang and then bring them into harmony with each other.
That is so cool. I could speak with you for like hours, but I think my camera battery is running out. So maybe next episode, we could talk for like hours about this stuff. So really thank you for being here and sharing your insights. I learned so much. I'm looking forward to another episode with you. And maybe you can tell us about your Stelso startup then.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers.
I wanna
Cheers.
give you some bad advice. You heard it right, bad advice.